now, is Professor Matsabisa with us? Are you?
Yes, I am
Yes?
here. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Can you share your screen and we can start?
Thank you
Thanks.
so much. And so I would like to say thank you to, the colleagues, David, and I see that I have my friend Michael and Melon after a long time. What I want to do really is, I think, Melon, you have set up, the foundation in terms of what I would want to talk about. I was then asked to look at the challenges and to look at the opportunities, and I'll take two of, I think, our own clinical trial and use those, as challenges, but look at them as broadly as possible. And then what I will then do in terms of, I think, the challenges, we will look at, I think, what are the raw material, I think, issues, around clinical trials. And this is focused, I think, mainly on Africa. We look at the production challenges, and then also we look at the clinical trials themselves, and then finish off and saying what are the opportunities, that could be there. We do our clinical trials with our partner, at Farmers. This is just down the road from where I am now. This is a University of the Free State, I think, clinical trial facility. We can conduct from phase 1, I think, up to phase 3 clinical trials. We can do, I think, in-house or in-bed clinical trials as well as, I think, outpatient clinical trials. And in this instance, I will want to talk about one particular traditional medicine that we have, I think, repurposed, for COVID-19. And I will not go into the preclinical work, but I think I can just touch on it in terms of, the in vitro work that we did, toxicology on the vervet monkeys, cytochrome P450 work to prove that I think the traditional medicine can be used safely, I think, with other drugs, to look at the efficacy both in vitro and in vivo. And then looking at, I think, the first in human studies, the dose determining studies to set up and say what are the correct doses. And then in terms of, I think, the aspects of quality control, we did certificates of analysis. We looked at, I think, the fingerprints, from batch to batch. And then the clinical trial, I want to give two examples, where we repurposed the product, as a treatment for COVID-19. And then later on now we are running into as an adjuvant, for long COVID, and with those patients that have, I think, non-MDR pulmonary TB. And I'll use those as examples in terms of, I think, the challenges and the opportunities. The first clinical trial, was a multi-center clinical trial. And then this is where we're looking at this traditional medicine as a candidate therapy for moderate COVID. And that was, I think, at the height, of COVID, and we're looking at non-hospitalized, patients. And I think what, Marlene, we were talking about, I think the numbers, I think, are dependent on your outcomes, your endpoints, and therefore your biostatisticians then work out to say, these are the numbers. And in this instance, COVID at the time, you could not run a placebo, because it was a killer, but we then used, I think, these traditional medicines against the standard of care, that SOC, at the time. So we were comparing the traditional medicines with the available standard of care. The sites, I think, there were 3 sites. I think, those who know South Africa, I think Vereniging is in the around, I think, the Gauteng, Johannesburg area. And then we have, I think, the Kimberley site that is in the Northern Cape, the yellow, I think, big province. And then we had, I think, on the East Coast, in the Eastern Cape, in, I think, Port Elizabeth. The study was then approved, I think, in South Africa, we have, I think, 3, I think, layers of approval. First, I think we got your institutional approval, or you could also go to, I think, an independent ethics committee. I think in this instance, I think it was approved by Pharma Ethics, and then approved by, I think, our regulator. And then we got your SANC number, which is your Department of Health clinical trials number. And those are the requirements, I think, for us before we could start any clinical trials. And in this instance, again, the biostatisticians worked out that I think we needed, I think, based on the outcomes that we're looking at, I think one of the outcomes was reduced hospitalization. I think it was also, I think, reduced deaths and the quality of life improvement. So they looked at the number to be 231, I think, study participants, and we had a ratio of 1:2. One in terms of, I think, the standard of care, and then twice in terms of your traditional, I think, medicines. This was about 28 days, I think, in duration on a patient or a participant basis. If a participant comes today and the other one comes, next week, and then they would then, I think, work on those 28 days, because you couldn't get all the participants, in one go. And then the second study that, in fact, is still ongoing, that's still running. This is where now we are looking at this product, and if I can go one step back, this traditional medicine is composed of 4 plants. I think it started at the time of HIV and AIDS, but then we repurposed it, I think, for, COVID-19, based on, I think, it's a mechanism of action, based on, I think, the work that we did, where we had, a big study on, I think, mice, knocked down their immune system, and then compared those, I think, with cyclosporine, cyclophosphamide, and dexamethasone, and understanding, I think, the effect of the traditional medicine on those, that it actually reversed, the cyclosporine and the cyclophosphamide induced immune suppression. Then we knew that it could actually be working through humoral or cellular immunity. That was a mechanism. And we then used that data together with the data that we collected in vitro work on, the effect of PELA on, I think, the different, I think, strains of COVID-19, or variants of COVID-19 at the time. And it showed very good effectivity. So I'm sorry I didn't show all this, study. And that was the reason why then this was repurposed, I think, as a treatment for, I think, COVID-19. But I think later on then we started working, because we realized on a clinical observational study that the patients that had HIV and AIDS, the patients that had, pulmonary, I think, TB, they felt better, and they were, I think, relieved, on the consumption of PELA. But also a combination of these traditional medicines with rifampicin and isoniazid improved, I think, the efficacy of those drugs. And we then also looked at, I think, the effect of these traditional medicines on, disruption of the biofilm formation. And that then moved us to say, we can also repurpose this traditional medicine, for long COVID and pulmonary TB. And this is the current study that is going on. There are 4 sites, and again, I think, I'm not just reiterating what Marlene is saying. It is important that I think there's community, I think, involvement, in all, I think, the design of the clinical trial, the work that we did. We have been working with communities. They become part, I think, of the team, because they can also help us mobilize. They can also help us explain, I think, the study, I think, within the communities. We used the 3 sites that we used in the first study, but also added another study, I think, in the Durban area. So there were now 4 sites, 600 patients. I think these were, I think, now put in a 1-to-1 ratio, where we have, I think, PELA, plus, I think, your TB, I think, standard of care treatment. And then the other group is also just your TB treatment plus a placebo. Now, the reason why we did that is simply because we did not want to disadvantage any patient. So therefore, all the patients would still benefit, but we were more interested to see the combination of PELA and the TB treatment. Will it, reduce the treatment period, from 6 months, to less than 6 months. And that's really our, outcome. That's what we want then to see, based on the data and the results that we have shown of the combination of this product with rifampicin and isoniazid. So what are the challenges? And then you look at, I think, 600 patients and say, what would be the batch, size that we need to produce? And I had the discussions about GMP. It is a requirement, in South Africa that if you're going to give an unregistered, product on a clinical trial, because approval is given, to do the clinical trial on an unregistered product, because this product is not registered. And therefore, the regulator is more interested in the safety of the participants. And we then, I think, are required then to produce the batches of the clinical trial in a GMP facility. Now, if we work on herbal medicines, and I think this is a greatest challenge right through Africa, very few countries, if there are any, that do commercial cultivation of, traditional medicines, and therefore most of, I think, the collections are in the wild. And therefore, if you look at, I think, those products that need the leaves, that need the seeds or the fruits, they are affected by seasonality. The leaves, I think, for those countries that are outside the tropics like South Africa, when winter comes, you no longer have the leaves. What then do you do? This is for continuity. Sustainability issues, again, a lot of African, I think, herbs and African medicines are reliant on using their bulbs. They use the roots or the stem, seeds and the fruit, and this poses a sustainability challenge. What then should Africa do? Move into, I think, the aspect of commercial cultivation, while your traditional health practitioners might say, no, but our belief is that things that are planted, are not in fact the right thing for us to use. But we need to change that mindset and say, but plants are plants, and therefore I think we need to look after, the sustainability of these issues. But it's also sustainability in terms of, I think, constant supply. Once you get your product onto the market, you need to have the supply. So if you cannot have the supply, it then defeats, I think, the purpose in terms of why are we putting our traditional medicinal products into the market. And then there was the issue of quality, I think, aspects. And I'm going to give a simple example, which we picked up when we did our production, that sometimes plants vary in terms of where you pick them up. And this could also pose, I think, production and clinical trial challenges. Collection challenges: where do you collect these plants? When do you collect it? And I think this is more back at home. Unfortunately, I think when South Africa got, I think, not really the independence, I think, when there was 1992, I think the freedom came, the land still belonged, to the few. And therefore, if you want to go and collect plants, if you either collect it in a government land or you have to go and find it in someone's land. And these bring, I think, issues in terms of when can we collect, how much can we collect, what is it then that brings in expectations from the landowners. And these are the real problems that we need to overcome if we are to then take our traditional medicines, I think, into the global markets, but also into internationalizing what we want to do. Collection permits, I think these are the issues that we talk about. I think, from environmental affairs, here at home, we have the National Environment and Management Act, which then requires that if you collect, I think, indigenous knowledge or you collect plants, there needs to be free prior informed consent, and then there needs to be some mechanism of benefit sharing that you put in place. But how then do you put in place benefit sharing if, one, you're not so sure if the study is going to generate any monetary value? You can also start talking about non-monetary beneficiations, but I think, a lot of our traditional health practitioners, a lot of everybody immediately start thinking about the aspect of monetary, I think, beneficiations. These are some of the challenges that I posed to us. Research and development. There are very few, in fact, facilities that are CGMP accredited, in South Africa. I'm not so sure the other countries, but it creates a problem in terms of if you are to run a small batch, for this clinical trial, we needed about 90 kilograms, of dry weight. You cannot go to a big, pharmaceutical company like Aspen and ask them to stop their production and just slot you to run a small batch for your clinical trial. And these are real challenges. How then do we do that? One needs then to find a small company that would be able to say we can do that, because universities themselves cannot then produce batch trials or batch sizes for clinical trials, because we need GMP. That's what the regulator says. And this then creates that problem. We need to then to find those companies that would be able to say, yes, we can accommodate your small batch, because we are not very busy. We talk about extraction yields. One of the plants in the combination of PELA, the yield when you do your 70%, ethanol water, it's about 2% or 2.5%. You need a lot of plant material, to get to, I think, the 4 kilograms of your extract that you are looking for. Where do you get such, material? Then you are going to get into your environment, aspects, because you need to go out into the field, into the wild, and collect these things. And again, I think, we want to keep saying, maybe Africa, we need to start commercial cultivation if we are serious about, I think, commercializing our traditional medicines. And then you talk about R&D again, I think, product material. A lot of people use, organic, solvents. People will use your hexane, they will use, your petroleum ethers. Will these actually be suitable, to take those extracts, into commercialization? And I'm here talking about total, I think, extracts. I'm not talking about, isolates, from your extracts. If you have 4 plants, it will be very difficult to find one molecule that would be active on those. So the best for us to get products onto the market, good quality, safe products onto the market, then we should actually have standardized, extracts. And then the formulation challenges, again, I think this goes into a lot of people will take, a plant, they just mill it up and then put it up into a capsule. Is that right? Or do you need actually to do more on that so that you can begin to understand, is this available? How much of it is it available? And your fingerprinting would then help you, begin to calculate those. And therefore, I think this is, some of the extracts that we have been talking about, and you would see that beautiful extracts. And we needed, I think, for the COVID-19 600 patients, about, 90 kilograms of dry plant material. It's lots of material. And to get to that dry plant material, in fact, you need over 100 and something kilograms of the wet plant material. This creates all these challenges, that drags us into how then do we get into our clinical trials, how then do we get our products onto the market. But PELA has been formulated as a 350 milligram capsule, size 0 capsule, and you take, I think, 2 of those in the morning and 2 of those in the afternoon. But we have also moved now to make out the mouth spray, and this is based on, I'll talk about it later, based on, I think, what we have learned from COVID-19. Now, here's the biggest challenge. This particular product that you see on the left, and I hope my slides are moving, this is the original extract. The second batch that we collected in a different region, that's what you see on the right. And this then shows us that there's a big challenge in terms of quality, in terms of getting, I think, the right thing. They were totally different extracts of the same plants. Are these affected, I think, by the soil? Are these affected by, I think, the minerals or things that are growing there? So it becomes very, very important that before we could do your batch manufacturing, you do a small trial and make sure that your extracts conforms, I think, with what you have set yourself on your certificate of analysis to be, these are the acceptable, extracts, these are the acceptable parameters. So we could not accept, that second batch because it was completely different. And then I think people might be asking, I talked about placebo, because we said you'd have patients on TB medication and on placebo. And we are not walking into saying we want to make a plant-based placebo. In fact, we are looking at, I think, a combination of your magnesium stearate, your maltodextrin, to make those as a placebo. Maybe wrong, maybe right, but with the assumption that nobody will open up, I think, the capsule and see that indeed, I think these are, not the same, because we have these, I think, monitors. It's more like a directly observed treatment where patients, in fact, take the treatment, I think, at the clinics or with the nurses, at home. I will not repeat this because that's what I've just said. I'll move on. And then I think what I've just want to show here was then the formulation. We started off, I think, with those capsules, 4 capsules per day. That's determined, I think, from our first in human studies and our dose determining studies, as well as being determined by the traditional use. And then we created up a mouthwash a mouth spray in the middle. It was a simple mouth spray to cater for those, I think, patients that cannot swallow. And then later on, then we did, I think, an improvement of that mouth spray, with a gelation type of, I think, spray that would actually go and sit right at the bottom of your throat to begin to target, in fact, where the viruses sit. So it's the same product, but we then worked on different formulations to address different, I think, patients' needs. Now, what are, I think, your regulatory challenges? Again, I think, this happens. I think we did a study because I'm helping, I think, the regulator to come up with a regulatory framework for traditional medicines. So we did a benchmarking. I think we went to Ghana, we went to China, we went to Brazil to begin to find out how do these countries do what they're doing. And all of them, in fact, you will find that they do not have a separate regulatory framework for traditional medicines. That creates a problem because you'll find that the reviewers, when they look at traditional medicines, there's always these negative, I think, perceptions. There are these, I think, prejudices against traditional medicines. That's, I think, one big challenge. We need to see a regulatory reform in terms of how then, I think, do regulators look at traditional medicines. The other regulatory, I think, challenges are around policy. These are political decisions that needs to be, I think, done to take traditional medicines, African traditional medicines, more serious. I think we need to have our politicians coming up and say, this is our stance in terms of the support, in terms of the funding, in terms of the regulation. That's the political will we are looking for, because nobody wants to fund clinical trials on traditional medicines. Industry does not want to fund it because it's a high risk. Nobody wants to fund it. So governments need to fund it if they are serious to develop their traditional medicines. So we need that investment. And I was talking about probably a ring-fenced type of investment to make sure that at least African traditional medicines, see the light of day, as well as, I think, the change, in terms of health policies and their implementation. We do not have, I think, a lot of, expertise, of people in Africa, who can do clinical trials, who are interested in running clinical trials, and also they are not even maybe good approved sites. So I'm talking now not in general, because for South Africa, for you to identify a clinical trial site, it has to meet minimum requirements from the regulator. So you need to go there, make sure that this site does qualify to be a clinical trial site. So you cannot just pick up a hospital or pick up anything and say this is a clinical trial site. Clinical trial management, I think, Melanie, you have been talking about these things. All those things, they need to be managed, I think, within a clinical trial. Very few CROs in Africa, these are clinical research organizations that would actually conduct clinical trials. Universities, they would want to do that themselves, but are they in the right space, in the right position to actually run clinical trials? Clinical trials are very expensive. I think that's a chasm that I was talking about. Nobody wants to fund it. The only people that would actually fund African traditional medicine clinical trials are the governments. And hence we need that policy change, to talk about that. As I was listening today, I think, seeing the chats, everybody was asking, I think, the professor from Burkina Faso, give me the name of that plant to do that. How does the issue of intellectual property protection, go about, in conferences like this, where one wants to share the information and give it, I think, to everybody, lose that intellectual property, then I think you reduce your risk, of putting this onto the market, or reduce the risk of having someone to say, I am interested, I think, in the IP, but then you cannot monopolize it. So we need to be, I think, very careful in terms of, I think, how then do we put what we are presenting so that then we do not lose that advantage. And then there's also the aspect that probably running a clinical trial, does not necessarily give you a market advantage. It is in fact your marketing people, it is in fact your data, it is in fact, I think, how you market your product. But I think regulators do not give you, a market advantage, because now you say your product has gone through a clinical trial, it's now being registered. You still have to go and do those hard works. This is sort of my last slide in terms of, what I thought, could be, I think, the opportunities. Yes, indeed. I think, if you have a product that has gone through clinical trials and the study can be interpreted and the data can be interpreted, it gives you, I think, an advantage that you can then access other markets, outside, I think, your country. You can have your product being registerable in other countries. So it makes you stand out from the pack. I think, we know a lot of products onto the market. They are actually not getting any market authorization. And then there's also this market advantage, that you can then have this market advantage because your product will be registerable, to other, medicines regulatory, authorities. But also I think, you have what we call a NEPI code here at home, where you could then have a product where you could then have your medical aid pay for it, because at least now that product, is now registered. That product, has gone through rigorous science. And we have been talking about also WHO endorsing some of the products that have gone through the clinical trials. And this is the discussion, I think, for Africa, that we're saying WHO could help us endorse, those traditional African products that have gone through clinical trials, and put some of those into essential, medicines lists. And again, I think this is a country-dependent thing, as well as if you industrialize, your herbal medicine, probably I think countries would offer tax incentives, for you to grow, and for you, I think, to access the market. We need commercial cultivation. I can't reiterate this more. We need commercial cultivation, one, so that at least we do not deplete, the 10% that David was talking about, of the plants that Africa has, so we also need commercial cultivation to ensure there's quality. A regulator is more interested in the safety, the quality of products. Efficacy comes, I think, somewhere at the bottom. But if we can do that, we'll create jobs, we'll create the skills, and that's what the countries are looking for. And we can, in fact, have an industry based on, herbal medicines, traditional medicines, and have this agricultural industrialization, as well as conservation and saving the planet. Recommendations, I think we need a mindset, a change, I think, in terms of how MRAs, run, how MRAs look at traditional medicines. Some MRAs are using external, I think, reviewers from universities. These may have conflicts of interest, and this creates a bit of a tension. But also, I think we need to have a mix of expertise in clinical trial evaluations. We cannot have, one-sided, skill of people that are trained in one way, but I think we need that mix of skills. But also, I think we're saying, I argue and say a protocol is a protocol. I would want to say there's no protocol that we say it's a protocol for African traditional medicines. The protocols that we have put up here are protocols that meet any other standard, of a protocol. So let us, I think, move away by thinking that we can have a protocol that is fine-tuned for African traditional medicines. We need to look at our endpoints. What is it that we want to do? But a protocol must be a protocol. It must be as scientific as possible. We are looking at a total, I think, regulation, of traditional medicines. It must not be hidden or clumped somewhere with all other regulatory aspects. I think here at home, I think we're proposing that there must be a category E, which is a category just for regulating African traditional medicines, from registration, dossiers, clinical trials, and all that. It still falls within, I think, your medicines regulatory authority, but there must be a unit that specializes, on traditional medicines. And again, we need funding. People might ask, how much did the 2 clinical trials cost? The big one, 600 patients, it's 75 million rand, to run that clinical trial over a period of 6 months. It's expensive. Who can fund that? Will industry, I think, want to invest in that? Probably, I think what we did, get money from government to help you if they are serious about, development of traditional, medicines. And the last thing that I want them to say is that political decisiveness. This reminds me, I think, of China, where they woke up one day and made a decision that traditional Chinese medicine has the same status, as any other. I think African leaders must be decisive to make a decision in terms of how they would take the direction of traditional medicines. Thank you so much, colleagues. I know I did not go into the details, but I'm here, I'm available, for any other question. And I also want to say this work was done through, I think, my staff, my students, my postdoctoral fellows, as well as my communities, my traditional health practitioners that work with us. So it's not a one-man thing. And I would like to say thank you to all of them. And they keep the good work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Matsabisa, for the excellent talk. Really informative. And personally, I really appreciated that you gave us also some detailed practical ones that usually overlooked, but are very critical. You talked about not only opportunities, but challenges. So our chat is really vivid, I would say. There are many questions. There is one practical that if our the presentations will be available, to my knowledge, will be in GA for GA members. And about the slides and the recordings, David, you comment on this, I think. They will be available, I suppose.
Yes, what we'll do is just send an email to the email addresses that are provided, and then we will make a plan.
Okay. Yeah. And is there any questions? I see here many. I saw a comment about intellectual property rights for traditional healers, for example, or benefit sharing. What is your opinion about that?
Thank you so much. I think to us, we have the National Environmental and Management, Biodiversity Act. Chapter 6 of that stipulates that, anyone that wants to collect indigenous knowledge from communities, from anyone, there must be free prior informed consent. And secondly, I think, once you move into bioprospecting, then there must be a benefit sharing principle put in place. How are we going to share the benefits? Should this, I think, be commercialized? The work that we do from the University of the Free State in my program, it's all based on research collaborations. So we have research collaborations with communities, with traditional, health practitioners. The work that we have just presented here, we have already got, I think, a benefit sharing in place, whether it is going to be at the agricultural phase or whether it will be at the commercialization phase. But more importantly is we give, I think, communities and, knowledge holders the option and the choice that We have done the work. So if you want to commercialize it, you can actually go and do it yourself, or you can commercialize it through our instruments, because we are in fact having a pharmaceutical company ourselves at the university. So you can commercialize that through us. Then you become a part of it, and therefore then you then are entitled to the benefits. That's what we do. We do a lot of, I think, community development, where we build infrastructure at the community level so that we can help them develop up, I think, businesses, and we work with them to ensure that, I think, those businesses are sustainable. So those are, I think, the models that we use in terms of the benefit sharing. We are not into so much favor in terms of licensing out the IP, because it makes it very difficult. It makes it very difficult to monitor. How does a traditional healer somewhere, I think in a rural area, monitor the sales, the production, and all that? So the best is you become part of us, you become part of the business, or you can actually develop the business yourself. So those are the models that we use. So we believe very strongly, I think, in the access, of the knowledge. We believe very strongly in the benefit sharing. Our patent, I think, act also stipulates that should anyone wants to file a patent that is based on indigenous knowledge, they must have evidence and proof that that knowledge was in fact acquired through fair and free and prior informed consent.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yes, there is one of our participants that would like to have a question, maybe the last one, before opening the discussion. Yes, please. Sahin.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Sir, is there any advantage of clinical trials for natural product medicine over those allopathy medicines?
Thank you so much for the question. We always say we are not doing what we're doing, or we're not putting herbal medicines as a replacement, for allopathic medicines. We're not doing that, and nor are we interested to do comparative studies of herbal medicines with allopathic medicines. We don't want to do that. But I think we want to find alternatives, and other, treatment, options. Or allopathic medicines are not the solution to everything. So that's our approach. We're not replacing allopathic medicines, and we are not trying to do what you'd call, a comparative study. That, for instance, we would not have received ethical approval on our long COVID and pulmonary TB if our approach was, we're going to have this herbal medicine as a competitor to the current available TB treatment. Everybody would say that we know that there is an available TB treatment, it works. Are you now going to say you are going to have something that's better than this one? So we don't want to do that. We just want to say, let there be other alternatives, and patients would have a choice, to choose, as long as I think, the product is well researched, as long as the product is of good quality, and if it has got, I think, gone through clinical trial, then it may have actually an added advantage.
Okay, thank you. So I would like now to ask from David to take the lead and do a conclusion remarks and open the discussion.